Hello friends, and welcome back. I'm Shannon Makes, creator of vaguely historic clothing by day, circus artist by night. And if your algorithms look anything like mine do, then you've probably already seen this advertised to you online. Or at least this? Or maybe this. They're corset hoodies and they're equal parts ridiculous and intriguing, and I must have one. So naturally, I'm going to make one. I've got a couple yards of this lovely burgundy sweatshirt fleece, as well as a burning desire to combine two of fashion's most and least restrictive garments into one single unit. So let's head to the design phase. To get started, I thought it would be a good idea to take a look at what other corset hoodies are out there on the market. And right off the bat, a quick Google search gives us tons of images and also reveals that some designers have a stricter interpretation of a corset than others. So starting off with the original image that inspired this project, Cider's gray hooded corset hoodie, it's got a nice V shape both in the waistline and the underbust, which looks like it's trying to mimic sort of a waspy underbust corset. I love that line. I also really love the zipper feature. I think that's kind of cool. The corset section seems to be made out of different panels with fairly minimal shaping and I don't think any boning, which probably is really comfortable. The only thing I'm not loving here necessarily is how wide open the top front is and that it reveals the shirt you're wearing underneath, because sometimes I like to just be slouchy and comfortable and wear kind of a garbage t-shirt underneath, and I'm not sure that I necessarily want that to be visible through the hoodie. Moving on to a couple other non-Cider options. This one was apparently $216, which, since I find it the most underwhelming of all the options, does seem a bit crazy to me. This one is definitely not my style, but I did do a double take for a second because I really thought it used an actual busk, but a closer look reveals that it's a corset style buttons, which at least seems more legit than their signature bandage fabric and illusion vegan leather. So after looking at all those different takes on a corset hoodie, here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking I want the corset part to have that waspy shape on the top and bottom. Then for the top, I think I'd like to try to keep it closed rather than having a zippered front, more like the graphic hoodie example. I like the contrast of a fitted waist with a baggy chest, so a lot of volume up top, and I'm going to try to gather all that fabric down into the corset rather than pleating it or making darts or just kind of brute forcing all that extra fabric in like some of the other examples I saw. But I think in order to have a properly fitted bottom and a baggy top, I need some way to sort of loosen the garment to get into it, and I think I've found the solution in the first of the patterns that I'll be using for this project, and that is the Briar Top by Mood. It's already got the corset bottom with a looser top, and it has laces in the back to adjust the width and help keep the bottom portion fitted. Plus, it's a free pattern that comes in a pretty wide range of sizes, which is a huge bonus. So with that as a starting point, I then went digging through Mood's catalog looking for hoodie options and came up with their Gordonia hoodie, which is also pretty size inclusive, and I'm thinking I can sort of Franken pattern these two together to get the general shape of a corset hoodie. So let's assemble these patterns and see where that leads. Okay, so that took a little bit longer than anticipated because, of course, I had to go through that whole process with not one, but two patterns, but now everything is cut out, taped together, assembled, First, I'm going to combine them all into one pattern. And the game plan to do that is going to be to keep the corset bottom from the briar top, and then kind of try to just cut and paste the Gordonia hoodie onto that right at that line right here. I'm gonna use the top from the briar top pattern and just use it for the height, make sure that my hoodie height kind of matches that, but then otherwise just use the Gordonia hoodie pattern as is so that I have, you know, the arm size match, the neckline matches with the hoodie. I think that's gonna be the simplest plan of attack. So let's just jump right in it and see how it goes. So that also took a bit longer than expected, mainly because the arm's eye torso section of the two patterns are vastly different. So it was really tricky to switch one torso in for another while respecting vaguely the same proportions and also not messing too much with the arm's eye or neckline from the original hoodie. I think I did a pretty decent job, but I guess we're gonna find out soon enough. So starting with the top half, and to try and keep about the same volume as the original, I had to take the hoodie pattern and split it vertically in the middle of the shoulder seam and then spread it to add a bit of additional width. And I ended up adding almost an inch on both the front and the back. So we've got 7/8 of an inch added in here. And then once I had the width taken care of, I could look at the height, and I used the original briar top pattern as a guideline for how much height to add in here on the side seams. And I also figured that I should probably keep these lines pretty much as same as possible. So I traced them out verbatim, or as close to it as I could. I did have to do some hijinks here in the arm's eye armpit area because I did want to make sure that I kept the arm's eye from the hoodie exactly the same. But then I did go and look at some photos of the briar top on the Mood website, and I decided that I actually wanted a little bit more volume and blousing in the top half to make a bigger contrast between the top half and the bottom half. So I then went back in and added just 3/4 of an inch of height to the bottom edge, just scooted that whole bottom edge down 3/4 of an inch, and I'm thinking that that will give me just enough volume to have the top sort of blouse a little bit over the more fitted corset portion. So once that was done, all I had left to do was to sort of true up the shoulder line here, and then I could cut it out. Moving on to the corset section of the corset hoodie, I wanted to go in and tweak the shape to make it accentuate that waspy shape with the point on the top and bottom of the middle panel. And if you look at the original pattern, you can see that the briar top does have a little bit of that going on the top part of the corset. So I just went in and added a little bit on the very first panel here to sort of accentuate it even further. And then the bottom edge was completely horizontal, just straight across. So there I went in and added a fair amount on the first and second panels of the corset, just to really make sure that it was accentuating that shape and getting that nice V line right below the belly button. And that was pretty much it for changes. The good news is that because I didn't modify the arm size or the neckline and I was able to keep them perfectly intact and as is, it means that I don't have to do anything to the sleeve pattern or to the hoodie pattern. They get to stay as is, and that means that the next step for me is going to be making a really quick mock-up of this corset section, because while I'm pretty confident about how the top half is going to fit, especially because it is supposed to be a bit roomier, I'm not entirely sure that I'm confident in how the bottom half is going to fit, so let's go and make a quick little mock-up. Well, as you can probably tell by my face, that mock-up was a complete disaster, but that's okay, that's what mock-ups are for. Not only was it just too small in general, but the pieces seemed to be missing more width at the bottom than they were in the top, which made the bottom edge of the bodice veer off towards the ground like it was the final scene of Thelma and Louise. I tried making a temporary fix by cutting some slits in the front panels and pinning in some triangles of extra fabric. Then I tried it back on. Yes, hello, this is potato footage from quite late that evening, but it became clear pretty quickly that while I was on the right track, it was still far too small. So the next day I reprinted and cut out a bigger version of the bodice, which was much closer, but it still had the same problem where it was missing fabric along the bottom edge. So once again, I marked it out, slashed the mock-up, and added in some fabric, but this time I also added in some laces with the help of my lacing strips. These are the first attempt at the back panel from my 1890s sports corset, which were cut too small at the time. And don't worry about these panels going to waste, I will be repurposing them as lacing strips for future mock-ups. This being a future mock-up, it was the perfect time to pull them out and pin them on to get a more accurate look at the fit, and for lacing I used some thin elastic because that's what I'm thinking I'll use in the final garment as well. And once I actually managed to wrestle the bodice with all of its pins over my body, it fit much better. Now obviously it has no boning to hold it up, so it is looking a bit sad and floppy here, but the circumference was quite comfortable, which was the main thing that I was testing. So I measured out how much extra fabric I had added in, and it came out to almost exactly 1 inch per slice, so I went back to the paper pattern and went through the same slashing and spreading process that I had done before, just this time with the additional step of some vertical slashes to add in that extra width along the bottom of the front panels. Okay, so where I'm at right now is that I've got all of my corset pieces cut out and down to the right shape, and also just to be on the safe side, since that first mock-up was such a disaster, I went ahead and grabbed my shirt from the other day since I like the sizing on that one, and I just sort of checked the upper pattern pieces against it to make sure that they were, roughly the same size, and that all looks good. Now, really, I should cut into this fabric today, but listen, we just got our first snow of the season and Canal is begging me to go outside and play in it, so we're gonna take a very short snow break if you'd like to join us, and when we get back, we'll cut into that fleece. Now that the dog was fully exercised, I figured it was time to stop procrastinating and start cutting out the fabric. Okay, well, I've got all of my pieces cut out except for two, and those pieces are the cuff, just because I'm thinking I might add a little bit of length to it, so I'm holding off on that for the moment, and the hoodie, and that is because at the moment I still have enough fabric left uncut that if I really screw something up along the way, I can go back and recut it out and still have a sweatshirt corset just without a hood. So the hood is going to be the absolute last thing that gets cut out after I've already tried on the rest of the garment, and that means that the next thing to do is to start sewing this together. But that's gonna have to wait until tomorrow because it is late and I am pooped. So let's pick this back up bright and early tomorrow, shall we? The next morning started with the assembly of the corset section, which, having done it twice already, went pretty smoothly. All of the pieces were laid out in order, then pinned together and sewn up, this time with the added step of pressing them afterwards. With both bodices sewn, I attached them together along the bottom line, which was actually not the right step to do, and I had to go back and unpick these stitches later, but I'm glad I did it because it allowed me to try the piece on one more time and make some final tweaks to the sizing. So I've got my inner bodice and my outer bodice assembled together into one piece, and now I've gone ahead and once again pinned on my lacing strips to my hoodie, which is not only incredibly useful but also one of the more ridiculous sentences I think I've ever said. However, it did actually prove to be really useful because I put it on and I could tell that I was going to need to take in just a little bit of width around the back area, and I think I'm going to take it out of the seam between the two back panels because the side seam is sitting properly and where I want it to, right on the side of my body. So any additional width that needs to get taken out is going to come from the side back where it meets the back back. After I made some tweaks, which included adding some interfacing to the back panels where they would eventually get grommets, I then unpicked all that stitching along the bottom edge because the next step was actually to gather the bottom edge of the front hoodie down into the corset section. This was done with some hand-sewn gathering stitches and a large amount of pins. First, I sewed the outer corset to the hoodie, and then I went back and attached the lining in the same way, only this time I left little openings at each seam for my boning to be inserted later. That left me with a very clean finish on both the inside and the outside of the hoodie, with all the raw seams sandwiched on the inside of the corset section. The next step was attaching the back to the front at the shoulder seams, which was straightforward enough and which I did with my serger for a quick and clean finish. Then the sleeve was set into the arm's eye of the hoodie, which is not my usual order of operations, but it is a really straightforward way to set in a sleeve, so if sleeves give you trouble, definitely consider this method and see if it works for you. I sewed this step first on the normal machine, then removed the pins to check my work and make sure the sleeve was set in properly before taking it to the serger for a second pass. Then the sleeves could be folded in half, pinned down, and sewn together. This next step is a bit hard to describe, and it's not just me. The original instructions also left a bit something to be desired at this step, but basically up until this point, the inside and outside corset linings have been attached only under the bust, and now you have to go back and finish attaching them along the top. Then I could turn everything right side out, give it a quick press, and try it on. And that's when it all kind of derailed, honestly, because as it turns out, I hated the way it looked. There were two main problems. One was that the volume I tried to add into the top half just wasn't sitting right and was clearly far too long. I wanted a nice little blousing effect, but what I got was a sort of deflated shelf boob situation that just wasn't quite what I was going for. And the other problem was that the corset half was way too bulky and it just looked really thick. So I put the project down and walked away for a few hours because I was honestly feeling kind of frustrated and just needed a break. And then I came back last night and made some major changes. I replaced the entire inner lining with a much thinner cotton to eliminate some bulk around the torso. And then while I was there and had the hoodie all opened up, I also trimmed off about 1.5 inches of length from the front panel. Then I reassembled it going all the way up to where we just left off, plus one additional step, which is to use the burrito method to close up the bottom of the bodice. So here's my burrito. And I just need to stitch along this bottom line here, and then I should be able to turn it all right side out through one of the sides, and then we'll be one step closer to completion. The next step was to sew in all the boning channels, so I lined up the 2 layers and pinned them down, and then stitched a boning channel at every seam of the bodice. Next, I started to insert the boning, using those little holes that I had left in the inner layer for just this reason. But then I thought, wait, if I'm going to insert boning, I should probably have some binding too to complete the look. So I pulled out my fabric and cut one nice long strip, which I attached to the bottom of the corset in my preferred binding method, which is sewing it to the front by machine, folding the binding to the back, and stitching it on invisibly by hand. Along the way, I closed up the back edges of the corset, which were just folded under and whipped down by hand, keeping the lining layer tucked just to the inside where it would be less visible. Then I could continue boning the corset, which originally was just going to involve cutting them down to the correct size and then sanding the edges round so they don't cut through the fabric. But then I figured, I'm already being a bit extra with this whole garment, why not take it one step further? So I pulled out my drill and put a few holes in each bone, using a template to make sure the holes were all spaced out evenly, and those of you who have made corsets before are probably laughing at the implication of this, while those of you who haven't are probably wondering if I've gone off my rocker, but I assure you, this'll make sense in a minute. The bottom edge of the back was serged and folded over for a clean hem, then tacked to the inside of the bodice with a catch stitch. Again, by hand, because why not? I mean, fast fashion would never, but that's the benefit of making your own clothing. The hoodie was sewn together, then attached to the rest of the sweatshirt with a cute little overlap in the front. The cuffs were attached, the grommets were set in, and then there was only one last step to do. Now, normally I would do a little project reflection and review before the final reveal, but this video is already quite long, and I definitely have some thoughts and useful tips that I learned along this whole ridiculous journey, so I'll put them in a separate behind the seams video, which I'll link in the description. If you're thinking about making your own corset hoodie, be sure to give it a watch. It'll probably make your sewing journey go a bit smoother. But for now, my corset hoodie is flossed and it's time for a final reveal. Overall, I'm very happy with the results and glad that I pushed through the sticking points of this project because the final result is pretty dang cute. It fits well, it's both comfy and fairly flattering, and it's definitely unique. If you enjoyed this video and you'd like to say thanks, I do have a Ko-fi account where you can buy me a coffee, or if you're a big fan of the channel, you can also join as a monthly supporter and get access to extended versions of videos, monthly vlogs, behind the scenes, and some bonus corgi content. But for now, what's the moral of this story? Well, targeted ads can sometimes be useful. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you in my next video.